Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment. So in the previous classes we had seen the environmental status. We looked into need, purpose of EIA and evolution of EIA in USA and in India. And this week onwards we will start looking at the overall global timeline with respect to what initiatives were taken at international level and what incidences and movements were shaping the global intervention. So we are looking at this so that we have already looked at the environmental status. We have also looked at where EIA fits in, and this will help us, the global timeline will help us to understand the legal policy and the institutional framework, and then the various components which are involved in the process of EIA and how it's evolving and how it is changing with all the things which are happening or have happened and is happening constantly. So the coverage for this particular session would involve that will be looking into the global environmental timeline from 1970 to 1999, and we'll be looking at from the environmental perspective. And our major reference would be the ADB timeline here, as well as we are also referring to the UN training manual for this purpose, and then also international policy. So the expected learning outcomes, what is expected out of you after you finish this session is that you should be able to connect initiatives and events with the global environmental status and EIA. So you should be able to bring them together as we explore further. And you should be able to synthesize context for law, policy, guidelines and institutions at different levels. So why we are doing it, what we are doing, and how, what kind of additions are happening now or changes which are happening now. So as I had said in the very first class, that earlier environmental movement was of preservation, conservation, and then with Rachel Carson's publication of Silent Spring in 1962 and Population Bomb writing of Paul Ehrlich in 1968, the environmental movement led from the now it was changing towards the risk perspective. All this led to the formation of formulation of NEPA in 1969 and first Earth Day in 1970. So therefore, to see the overall policy context, we will walk through the timeline from 1970. So we are not covering before that. So we'll be walking from 1970 till 2021. And in today's session, we'll cover only up till 1999. And from 2000 onwards, we'll take in another session. So a very first form of policy, we see the conference covers the limits, navigation, archipelagic status and transit regimes. Then it takes care of exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, jurisdiction, deep seabed mining, the exploitation regime. So all these, what you have really studied when we were looking at the environmental status. So this United Nations conference on the law of sea was addressing to all those things here. So in the same year, you see that European Environmental Action Programme was launched, and this was the first attempt to synthesize a single environmental policy. So this was the first time where they were trying to have single environmental policy for the European Economic Community. So the entire European community would have a single policy. And also at the same time, we see the United States enacted the Endangered Species Act for the purpose of safeguarding and for the benefit of all the citizens, and then the nation's heritage, what was there. So even this was signed at that period, and this was the same time which we see that there was Chipko movement, which picked up in India in response to the deforestation and environmental degradation, which we recently saw in our previous one of the previous lectures, and which was also caused because of the influencing forestry practices, and women's participation was extensive in the environmental concern. So in 1974, in this year, we see that United Nations Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora opened for signature in Washington, D.C. It was an important step, which we see here, and it helped in controlling the illegal commerce in ivory, furs, and so on, for the product of endangered species. And on the side note, we can also see that just to understand the landscape at that time, the first World Population Conference took place in Bucharest, and 135 countries participated. So they were also concerned about the world population. And as we see that what we have studied in from the World Environmental Status, we saw how the population is one of the driving force. So we started looking at that here. And also there was a symposium, Kokoyok, in which there was an understanding developed about the maldistribution, uneven distribution of the resources, which was considered to be the key factor in the environmental degradation. So there's we have also seen this in our cases while we were doing this environmental status. So the people came together, and then they discussed about the development action focused on how to fulfill the basic human needs, since the resources were unevenly distributed. So in the same year, we see that World Food Conference was held in Rome, and that led to formation of World Food Council and the World Food Program. And by this time, the world's population reached 4 billion. So you can also see that in this year, we also had research work which by Mario and Frank, which talked about the chlorofluorocarbons in nature with the implications for ozone layers. So this research was also coming in and throwing more light and understanding over the environment. So in the year 1975, we see that World Watch, which is the a World Watch Institute, was established, and this institute raised public awareness of global environmental threats, like what was really happening, and it was done like as one of the key element for enabling environment to create to catalyze effective policy response. So if people are aware, they would really help in creating a good environment for effective policy implementation. So this World Watch started publishing the annual State of the World report in 1984. And there was also convention on the international trade in endangered species of wild flora and fauna, which came into effect here. And on the side notes, we would like to see that in the same year, there was publications and emphasis on development in poor countries. So we were also looking at how there is income disparity, there's an issue about the foods, all those was coming up, and then there was also movement in India. So when we look at 1976, there was first global meeting to link environment and human settlement. So you see that how the understanding was improving. Now we were looking at the human settlement as well. And with this, there was the United Nations Conference on Human Settlement, which was held in Vancouver. So we further see that in 1977, the Green Belt movement started in Kenya. It was based on the community tree planting to prevent desertification. So you have already seen that how desertification is happening. So in 1977, how the Green Belt movement started in Kenya. And there were other conferences also. People were coming together to discuss the issues. So United Nations Conference on Desertification was held in Nairobi. Then you also see the United Nations Water Conference held in Mar de Plata. And all of this, it sets the goal for providing clean water and adequate sanitation to all in the world by 1990. So that was the target which was set that time. In 1978, we see there was Amico Cadiz spill oil off the coast of Brittany. We see that, and that happened here. And we also see that OECD relaunched research on environment and economic linkages. So you see the oil, the accident happening here, and OECD relaunching the research on environment and economic linkages. So in 1978, we see that there was convention on long range transboundary air pollution. So that convention was adopted, and at the same time, so you see that how transboundary initiation started here. And we also see that there was also publication by Robert Steen on banking on the biosphere. So this was key element because it brought the procedures and practices of multilateral development agencies. So that way it helps in improving the understanding. And then we also see in the same time that there was another incident, 3 Mile Island nuclear accident, which occurred in Pennsylvania. So all these accidents, the economic related accidents were also happening. So like how we were developing this understanding here. So the World Climate Conference in this year concluded that the greenhouse effect from the increased buildup of carbon dioxide in atmosphere demands urgent international action. So there was urgency identified that how collective actions have to be taken for the greenhouse effect and all kind of development activities which were happening, and even how things have to be handled at the transboundary level. In 1980, we see that the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, it published the World Conservation Strategy. And in that section, in that particular section, they had a section on towards sustainable development. So they identified the main agents of habitat destructions, like what was really happening. And according to their writing, the main agent of habitat destruction was poverty, pollution pressure, which we are also seeing now, and social inequality and trading regimes. So how we were trading, that all had were the reasons for habitat destruction. So they called for a strategy for new international development, and particularly to readdress inequality. So how we can address inequality, and then there was need for international development, so the need for collaborating at an international level. So this year, the term sustainable development was first time introduced into the international policy debate by the World Conservation Strategy. So we see that sustainable development term came here. And at the same time, we see that the Council of Environmental Quality, CEQ, and the United States Department of State released the Global 2000 report to the President. So the key point about this is that it was here that biodiversity was recognized for the first time. So we also see now in 1980, the term biodiversity, or the understanding of biodiversity, was acknowledged, recognized for the first time as a critical factor to a critical factor which was considered that for functioning of the planetary ecosystem. So in 1981, we see that the World Health Assembly of World Health Organization adopted a global strategy for health for all by year 2000. So now the health concerns were also coming in, and it affirmed that the major social, so it was much more like looked forward to, like major social goals of government should be to be the attainment of level of health by all people that would permit them to lead socially and economically productive lives. So that is what they were looking at in 1981. We see that health concerns, that was acceptance came here. In 1982, we see that United Nations Convention on Law of Sea is adopted. The convention is adopted here. And in this convention, it sets rule for environmental standards. So now we see the standards coming in and the enforcement provision to deal with the pollution of the marine and environment. So this environmental standards came, and how those provisions can be made to deal with the pollutions of marine environment. So we had discussed about the range of problems which are there in marine environment. So now you can see at the international level what kind of conventions and standards are coming in. So in 1983, we further see that Australia adopted a national conservation strategy to implement the objective of World Conservation Strategy. So now the conservation part was also coming, and the World Commission on Environmental Development formed, you can see, it was formed, the Haarlem-Brundtland commission was formed. They were responsible to put up a report here. And also we see that development alternatives was established to look into the new relationship between people, technology, and the environment. So now we started seeing people, environment, as well as the technology, and in order to attain the sustainable development. So you see how each element is going on coming. And we see that another accident which happens in 1984, Bhopal gas tragedy. There's a toxic chemical leak, and which leads to death of thousands of people and injuries as well. And this led to the major industrial policy change and also environmental concerns. So apart from this, in the same year, we also see that in Ethiopia there was drought-induced starvation, and which the range of death is like from it's 0.2 to 1 million people died in this particular drought-induced starvation in Ethiopia. So you see the poverty, you see the industrial development aspect here. And our understanding evolved that environment and economics should be mutually reinforcing. So it should not be like opposing to each other, but it should be mutually reinforcing. And if you also recollect Mrs. Indira Gandhi's talk, which we referred to, how India's stand was for this sustainable development, or the perspective for the environment. Environmental concerns. So you will see that here we are looking at environmental and economic should be mutually reinforcing. So here we see that this understanding came in the discussion of International Conference on Environment and Economics. So in 1985, research showed Antarctic ozone hole. So our understanding further, like we saw about the Antarctic ozone hole, and we also see that World Meteorological Society, the UNEP program, and then the International Council of Scientific unions met in Vienna, and they reported about the buildup of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and they predicted the global warming. So now you see that how another aspect of environment is coming up about the global warming and the ozone hole. We also see development in this particular time, in this year 1985. Standards related with chemical productions were now adapted in many countries. So you see that in the previous years, the toxic leakage, those things happened, and some industrial interventions here also in this in 1985, which led to the standards related to chemicals production. So in 1986, we witnessed the Conference on Environment and Development, sponsored by IUCN, which was held in Ottawa. So here we see that participants defined sustainable development as the emerging paradigm. And there were two major concerns while they were considering this. That one was against the laissez-faire economic theory, which considers living resources as externalities and free goods. So the way we were looking at the resources, that it was opposing that, and then laissez-faire economic theory, it was opposing, the people were opposing. And also it highlighted the concept of resource stewardship, how we are supposed to take care of each other or all the resources which are there. So this voice was raised in this particular IUCN conference. So in the same year, 1986, we witnessed Chernobyl incident. So that was about the toxic radioactive active explosion in nuclear station. So that happened, and that was disastrous. And you can also look at a lot of suggested reading and watch, which we have given you for the details. So this also happened, which was again at a very different transboundary level. In 1987, we see another key publication, which from the Brundtland report came up, Our Common Future. And with this report, this term sustainable development got very popularized. So now the term was introduced, and now it was also getting popular, and then our scientific understanding of our environment also was improving, and then also how to deal with technology, economic, and also deal with the poverty and differences, the economic differences, and at the international level, how to deal with that. So that understanding was developing here. So in this time, we also witnessed adoption of Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. So as with the scientific understanding, we also had the protocol here. And in this, by 1987, the world's population reached 5 billion. So in this year, you see OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, formulated guidelines for environmental and development in bilateral and policies for financing purpose. So now the funding was also pressurizing, or in a way guiding nations to go for sustainable development, align their development with sustainability. So in 1988, we see that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was established, and it was established to assess the most up-to-date scientific and technical socioeconomic research in the field. So we see IPCC was established in this year. And we also see the usage of technology. The satellite imagery is used to document the effects of fires in the Amazon. And then at the same time, we see that Chico Mendes, the founder of Brazilian Rubber Tapers Union, was murdered in December. So you see across the world what was happening. He had led a non-violent campaign to stop the slash and burn conversion of Amazonian rainforest to pasture land. So by his death, the attention was focused on the destruction of the world's largest remaining tropical forest. So at the same time, we were also losing forests, and we are seeing all the destructions happening here, and IPCC also reporting being established to make give most up-to-date scientific, technical, and socio-economic research in the field. So in 1989, we see the formation of Stockholm Environmental Institute to carry out global and regional environmental research. We see that so Stockholm Environmental Institute formation happened. Side by side, we also see Exxon Valdez incident, which have like dumped 11 million gallons of oil into Prince William Sound. So we see that also environmental pollution happening with the activity here. So that also took place. And at the same time, we also see publication from the research domain coming, Blueprints for a Green Economy by Edward and Anil and David Pierce. So this report introduced the central role of the environment in economic and public policy decisions. So we also saw through this publication that environment played a key role in economic and public policy. So in the year 1990, we witnessed formation of the International Institute for Sustainable Development. So in this year, the International Institute for Sustainable Development came into was formed, and it began the publication of Earth Negotiation Bulletin to record international negotiations, how everyone was negotiating on the environment and development. So the United Nations, at the same time, we see United Nations World Summit for Children was also held in New York, and through this summit, there was linkages seen for future generations. So far our understanding was about like the differences, about the technology, about the environment, but now we started looking at the future, the tomorrow, our younger generation here. So we also see at the same time now we started establishing the Regional Environmental Center for Central and Eastern Europe to address the environmental challenges across the region. So you saw the transboundary, and now we are also seeing how regional environmental challenges were addressed, and with the emphasis on engagement of business as well as government, and also the civil bodies, bringing them together. So in 1991, then we see that another accident happened, that was cod fishery on the Canadian east coast that collapsed. So 100 of oil fires were also burnt out and burnt out of control in Kuwait in the wake of Gulf War. So there was war also happening, and then another accident. And then you also see another research and status report coming, where IUCN, UNEP, Worldwide Fund for Nature published Caring for the Earth. So it had a strategy for sustainable living. It was a sequel to their previous report, and it was influential as it sets like base for 132 actions to increase the human well-being and to stop the destruction of the Earth's capacity to support life. So what ecosystem services are provided, how we stop doing destruction to that. In the same year, we see that World Bank, United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, created the Global Environmental Facility. So they came together to create a facility to provide grants to developing countries. So they extended support to the development countries for projects that benefit the global environment and promote sustainable livelihoods in local communities. So in the same year, 1991, with the realization and acknowledgement that environmental threats do not respect national boundaries and danger should be prevented, and there's need for notifying and consulting with the other governments, the Espoo Convention was brought as a key instrument to bring all the stakeholders to prevent environmental damages before it occurs. So it was the first EIA specific international treaty. So here it was at the international level, and it was EIA specific, where we were going to undertake EIA at the transboundary level. So the convention entered into force in 1997. So the ESPO convention, or EIA convention you can say, sets out the obligation of the parties, like all the parties, the government which would be involved, would assess the environmental impact. So they would evaluate how much environmental impact is going to happen about the certain activity at the early stage of planning. And it would also lay down the general obligations about the states, that how they are going to consult with each other and how they're going to do the assessment, and how they're going to reduce the significant adverse environmental impact across the boundaries. So I have given you links to the case studies and videos, and you can look at them. So there's cases of nuclear power plant, and this is given to you. Access is given to you, so you can see how EIA is taken place at the transboundary level. Now we look at 1992. So the here we see that Business Council for Sustainable Development here in 1992 publishes Changing Course. So now we are seeing what we were looking at was like from the research community coming. Now we see that it's coming from the Business Council. So it established business interest in promoting sustainable development practices. So now we are seeing that how the business community was also engaging, and there was platform to create interest for them for sustainable development practices. Further, we see in the same year that, which is particularly important for us, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development held in Rio de Janeiro. Agreement were reached on Agenda 21 and the Convention on Biological Diversity. There was a Framework Convention on Climate Change and also non-binding forest principles. The outcome of the summit was first international agreement on climate change, which became the foundation for future agreements. Among them, in UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. This framework aims to prevent dangerous human interface in the climate system. It accepts that human activities are created, so those kind of acceptance happened here, creating climate change, and it was recognized that climate change is an issue of global concern. So it happened at this time. So the UNFCCC was enforced in 1994. We could not. We would note that UNFCCC is not legally binding to the signatories. With this agreement, all signatories came to a common understanding to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, no targets or timetables were set for the purpose. So there was for this, it was not legally binding. Further, there was no targets or timetables set, but there was an agreement, there was an acknowledgement. So and also it required that there would be frequent meetings between the countries who signed, and then the signatory countries are known as the Conference of Parties, or COP, COP. And as of 2019, as per the data available, it has been ratified by 197 countries, including United States and India. So UNFCCC directed to use EIA as an instrument of national decision making through the principle of 17. Principle 17. Principle 15 covers precautionary approach. And we find similar other aligned principles in EIA practice. India joined in 1992 and signed the agreement in 1994. We witnessed COP1 in Berlin and in this year, and then the outcome of that was the Berlin Mandate. And this mandate, this conference laid the background work for Kyoto Protocol. So you can see here the principle. In 1973, the United Nations Conference on Law of the Sea was held in New York. So following that, in 1992, we see that UN Convention on Climate Change and Biological Diversity. We see that it had the framework for EIA as an implementing mechanism. We see that in particular Article 4 and 14 referred to EIA. You can see here from this snip. So in the following years, we see comprehensive reform of long established EIA systems, and then we see that how New Zealand, Canada, Australia and India implemented that. So you can see year wise 1991, 95, 99 and 94 how like EIA system was being established. So we also see new or revised EIA legislation enacted by many developing and transitional countries. For example, we see Vietnam, Uganda and Ecuador also adopting it. So COP 1 took place in Berlin, and in this the United States pushed back in this particular COP 1, and here the Berlin mandate was formulated. So with this, the United Nations General Assembly set up commission. So the commission was set up on sustainable development to oversee implementation of Agenda 21 into the program and process of the United Nations system. So that happened 1992 here. And in 1993, we see that United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development established there was a commission which was established which would ensure follow up, like what's going on with that. And then we see at the World Conference on, there was also World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna, which is another important conference we see. So there the government confirms their international commitments. So all the governments came together and they acknowledged their international commitments to human rights. So in this, the first United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights was appointed here. So we see in 1994 under the Global Environmental Facility, so billions of aid dollar were restructured and were for improving the decision-making power to the developing countries. So a lot of funding was channelized here. So now you see how the resources are coming in. And there was also simultaneously North American Free Trade Agreements. Then we also see Commission for Environmental Cooperation, which was to facilitate effective cooperation of conservation, protection and enhancement. We also see that now we also have Conference on Population and Development, as well as we see United Nations Convention on Desertification, United States Agency for International Development. It was also redefining its foreign assistance program in terms of sustainable development, so how everybody was converging their efforts to sustainability aspect. So in 1995, we see that World Trade Organization was established, and WTO, World Trade Organization, provided formal recognition to trade, environment and development linkages. So it also identified, recognized it. And in the same year, we also see the World Summit for Social Development held in Copenhagen, and highlights the commitment of the international community to address the problem of poverty. So here they reinforced it that they would like to be tackling the problem of poverty. And at the same time, now we see another aspect coming in 1995 is the 4th World Conference on Women, which was held in Beijing. So in this negotiations, they recognize the status of women, and then they also looked at the obstacles which are still there for realizing the women's right as human rights. So now even the gender aspect coming here was, you can see how it is coming in the timeline. So next we see in the year 1997, we see now ISO 14001 is formally adopted as a voluntary international standard for corporate environmental management systems. So now we see that how for managing the environment, we have the standards coming in. And at the same year, we also see United Nations Conference on Human Settlement is held in Istanbul. So that is also progressing here, understanding about linking human settlement with the environment here. And then Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation ministerial meeting was also there on sustainable development in Manila. And in this Manila Declaration, an action program where the key areas such as like cooperation for sustainable cities, cleaner production and technology, and the sustainability of the marine environment was discussed. So in 1997, now we see that many things happened, but it also highlighted a lot of efforts were made, but it also highlights a lot of challenges which were there on ground. So land clearing, fires, which happened like in you see El Nino induced drought, which resulted in the haze blanket the entire southern eastern Asia, and that caused like 3 billion in health cost and fire related damages. So that was the cost, economic cost, which happened because of this land clearing fires. At the same in the same year, we also see United Nations General Assembly in this year reviewed the Earth Summit as a reminder for progress for implementing Agenda 21, and there were no significant commitments till here. Then we also see the Intergovernmental Panel on Forest also submitted its recommendations, but also indicated the need to collaborate, to come together, and so that need was emphasized. So the scenario was that we were still struggling to come together. And at the same time, we see the Earth Council convenes non-governmental organization at the Rio 5 forum in Rio de Janeiro. And it makes a note that there is lack of integrated approach, and many organizations and individuals are still working in isolation. So there was need for integrated approach. And then we see another aspect coming here in the same year. We see the Global Knowledge 97, Knowledge for Development in the Information Age was addressed, and it was held in Toronto. And here the global dialogue came, where people started talking about the how to harness knowledge and information as a tool for sustainable and equitable development. So now information, knowledge, all these aspects was also coming on the table for discussion and implementation. And we see that we also see that delegates to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. There was signing of Kyoto Protocol. The protocol commits developed nations to reducing overall emissions of several greenhouse gases, and the mechanism to encourage North-South cooperation on emission reduction. So in 1998, we see that there's concerns for global environment and food security are raised. And we also see that there's also blockage of genetically modified crops, and then there's also voice for terminator technology. And we also see that People's Republic of China experiences the worst flood in the decade. So there's also calamity disaster coming in. 2/3 of the Bangladesh are underwater for several months from monsoon. And there's also Hurricane Mitch, which destroyed the parts of Central America, and 54 countries were hit by flood and 45 by drought. And then there was a lot of problems which we were experiencing. So in this 1998, we see that the Global Sustainability Index was launched, which helps to track the leading corporate sustainability practices worldwide. So where all sustainability practices are being adopted. And we also looked at, this was also called as Dow Jones Sustainability Group Indexes. And this tool provided guidance to investors looking for profitable companies that follow sustainable development principles. So, see how the different indexes were being developed. Here we also see the Third World Trade Organization WTO ministerial conferences held in Seattle. So it met with the protests. So there were protests, and now against the globalization and growth of global corporations. So we see now another perspective, the opposition coming to globalization. Also, we see the environmental groups and social activists coming here, and then how they were multilateral agreements on investments. There were oppositions against it, and by this time we see that the world population reached 6 billion. And we see that in this year it was in Kyoto, Japan, that COP3 took place, and then that the conference adopted Kyoto Protocol, which was the first legally binding climate treaty. So earlier what we saw was not a legally binding, but by Kyoto Protocol, which was legally binding. So here we set like how much to reduce, by what time frame to reduce, and then we also, however, it was not not compelled upon the developing countries, including China and India. In this, we also see there was setting up of carbon market, and also there was concept of a system known as cap and trade was mechanized here. So in 1998, we see UNECE, Aarhus Convention on Access to Information, Public Participation and Decision Making, and Access to Justice in Environmental Matters. So now you see how information aspect is coming, also the public participation aspect is coming in decision making, and then access to justice in the environmental matter. So it was with the Aarhus Convention. So that was what we covered today. So we looked at the global environmental timeline. So we looked from 1970 to 1999 from the environmental perspective. So we looked at like how really we started from the silent spring, and then how eventually our understanding and inclusiveness increased about it. So how we addressed about the poverty, how we addressed about the health, how we addressed about the women, and also the biodiversity, and then the economy and the technology, information, as well as the public participation. So what keep reflecting like how we'll look at EIA, then how all these elements are now translated into acts and the notifications which you see. So we'll continue in the next session from here, from 2000 till date. We'll be covering in our next session. So these were our key references for this particular session, and these are the suggested watch and read. Please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have. Do share your opinion, experiences, and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring AIA. Thank you.